So we've got that side corner, left rear corner of the rear axle carrier panel disconnected now. That went well and to plan. So that's drilling out a series of spot welds all the way around the perimeter of this left rear corner. Here's an E92 330 that we've got in at Redish Motorsport. Unusual problem on this one. We've been brought a problem because the left rear subframe bolt has snapped, and it's been discovered by the customer or the owner that it was probably left loose somewhere in its life, and the constant energy and movement of the torsional energy when the accelerator is applied allows the subframe to move up and down if it's not clamped correctly. And if the bolt was left loose slightly, which we think it was, then the bolt simply snapped off eventually. And the customer's had a go at trying to repair it and has helicoiled the threaded receiver inside and put a new bolt in. And I think I was told it lasted 2 miles, and then because helicoil is just basically wound wire, it just probably pulled through, so it needs something a little bit stronger. So we're going to go in and investigate with some borescope camera activity through these grommets here and into the boot as well, and see what we can find of the structure and the makeup on this rear axle carrier panel on the E92. We were obviously brought this because we've got extensive knowledge with opening rear axle carrier panels, predominantly with the E46, whereas the E92 was, shall we say, beefed up extensively because of the problem that BMW were known for with the E46 failures. The subframe carrier is huge and very wide on the E92, and it's also got its threaded receivers built into the chassis legs, which go straight towards the back of the car, which was missing on the E46. The E46 has had them over here, which was sort of suspended in mid-air on some sheet metal work, whereas here we've got a very strong structure. So I can't imagine BMW have made it easy for us to get into this section, because they probably never require it to be worked on an E92, but that's what we've got to do. We've got a missing bolt in this section here, and somebody's already drilled the boot, as you can see above it, to maybe access it with a camera or something else. So this is the start of the process. We're going to get the axle stripped down and then see what we're working with. We've got the rear axle out of this car now, so the exhaust off, prop shaft, well, the exhaust split in the middle, prop shaft off, heat shields, a rear wheel arch liner, boot oddments tray, and the rear axle completely. A couple of brake pipes will be needed because the brake pipes were badly affected with corrosion and didn't want to come undone, they just split. And now we've removed the sound deadening material, well, the seam sealer material on the edges of the rear axle carrier panel joint, and our plan was always, as with every job, to try and do this as neat as possible. So rather than just cutting into this and cutting open a window on the vertical side or the horizontal side, we know we're going to need great access, and by great I mean large access, to get the internal section, because we can see that there's a strengthening dome in there, a second layer. So there's no point just making a small area. We need to go and get a corner of this apart. So we don't want to do welded lines and joining things. So we found the edges of the rear axle carrier panel, and we've center punched those and now drilled the spot welds out all the way around. So we're going to be making one small cut. Unfortunately, we're going to have to make a cut, which is this line here, going back up there to join this side of spot welds. As you can see, we're going to then take the entire left rear corner of this rear axle carrier panel apart. Here's the spring perch where we've drilled out the spot welds there. The spring perch will stay on the car if the plan works. This is a 3-layer connection, this one here. So we've got to get this section, part of the rear axle carrier panel, which is tucked in underneath this one. We've got to get that one separated. Drill out the spot welds here where it's connecting to that threaded receiver, because the threaded receiver is going to stay inside the car. And yeah, we're going to make an incision cut here next, and then take this corner section off and then see what we're left with underneath. So we've got that side corner, left rear corner of the rear axle carrier panel disconnected now. That went well and to plan. So that's drilling out a series of spot welds all the way around the perimeter of this left rear corner and this section where it was tucked in underneath this inner rear wheel arch corner. And then we've done our only cut that we needed on this section, so cut through the smallest part of the rear beam, if you like, of the rear axle carrier panel, and we've exposed the piece that we want to get access to, which is what we call the threaded receiver. This is the piece that's affected, and then also we've got the spring perch here, which is where the spring cup locates to. Interestingly, that's only got one spot weld in the middle there. Obviously it's held around here to the rear axle carrier panel, but that is quite a flimsy point there. The rest of the makeup of this is excellent, really well thought out. So this is the area that we want to get to. We can already see that there are two penetrating MIG welds in this area here that have been applied from inside the box section. So it looks like we are going to have to go inside the boot and cut a section open so that we can get to those MIG welds, because we need to release this system, this piece here. We can't buy this piece from BMW. They only sell a whole rear axle carrier panel, but the thread is affected, which is exactly why the reason of why we're doing all this repair. So we need to take that out and basically work out a new threaded system for this, or make up our own basically, but whatever happens, we need to get this out. The thread is extremely long on these pieces, so even just putting a small insert in, which is say 25mm tool, that one there, that isn't enough. We need a long threaded section, so we need to get this out and start again. So we're going to go inside next and open up the top section and then see what we're working with and attack it from coming down as well. So we're now in the boot, and if you remember in the video earlier, we'd already showed that somebody had already drilled 2 holes in this area here. We thought they were inspection holes to see what was going on, but interestingly those holes go all the way down into the thread. Maybe it was an attempt to repair it, but they are basically eating through the threaded receiver. So where the holes had been applied was straight through a MIG weld, which was stabilizing the top of that threaded receiver. So as you see, we've made a cut out section and removed top of the chassis leg so that we can see what we're working with. And here's the inner structure. The threaded receiver is just this upright stem here, which somebody's drilled 2 holes straight through, and it's MIG welded at the bottom just across there, which is holding it to the bottom of the chassis leg. Also another one on the bottom of this face down here, and then it's MIG welded all the way up the vertical section on the rear set face, and also up this side here to these stabilizing pieces, which are spot welded to the bottom of the chassis leg, the side of the chassis legs, and on that side as well. So they're stabilizing it extremely well. So it was welded at the bottom, the vertical sides, and then also a MIG weld up here as well, where somebody's drilled through it. So now we can see what it's like inside. We can decide how to attack it, and we know this piece here, this is where the affected thread is. The thread doesn't go all the way to the top, but the thread is a very long tool piece, and that needs to, remember, it's poking out of the bottom of this chassis leg at least 25mm into the platform. So that's the affected piece we need to take out. So we're going to remove this whole tube by taking out these MIG welds just here, and then we're going to reinstate a new piece, which is going to be our threaded M12 by 1.5 threaded receiver, and obviously replicate this system where it'll be welded to these stabilizing brackets. We're going to keep them in situ because they're doing an excellent job of stabilizing it, and then later on, once all this is cleaned out and prepared and weld through primer, then the top section of the chassis leg will be reinstated, and it will also be, we'll use this top section how BMW did. They applied a MIG weld to stabilize the top of the threaded receiver. The new one that we install, that is, will do exactly the same process. So next up is taking out that threaded receiver. So we've got the threaded receiver removed from the internal cavity section of this left rear chassis leg, simply by belt sanding through the vertical welds up here and also up here. That's about as neat as we can get that, and we're quite pleased it's come out nicely. And that's left obviously a hole in the chassis leg, which is where we've removed this, and we're keeping these stabilizers, like we say, because they do a great job. So we're just now working with the threaded receiver, cutting that about and playing with making up a new threaded section, M12 by 1.5, which we'll then reinstate, and we'll get it in loosely, and then put a spare subframe we've got, bolt that up to the underside of the car and get it torqued correctly, make sure the heights and levels are perfect, and wherever that new piece of the threaded receiver lands, then we'll weld it into position from up the top first. We don't want to weld anything before we put a subframe on, because it needs to be millimeter perfect. So we're going to basically do it in reverse and fit a subframe first and then weld that wherever it lies. And this is what it looks like from underneath now that that threaded receiver is removed. So we've prepared a new threaded receiver, an M12 by 1.5, and reinstated it. So we're using the original platform, which is now coated in copper weld through primer, and then the new threaded receiver, which is now not visible, it's inside the chassis leg. It's all part of being welded to this thread, this platform at the bottom, so it's all one piece, an exact copy of the original, using the majority of the original, just basically taking the threaded section out and then re-welding our own section. And now that's placed back in position, but like I was saying earlier in the video, there's no way you can just weld it without knowing exactly where it's going to bolt to, because even just half a millimetre out would cause the bolt not to go in. So what we've got is a spare axle here, or spare diff carrier. This isn't the diff carrier that came on the car, because we take the axle out completely, so that's still safely built up on our jig, but this is a spare donor diff carrier, and we've got that bolted into the chassis in all three original positions: near side front, near side, offside front, offside rear, and then near side rear. We've also got that bolted in, but obviously it's not doing anything because it's into the threaded receiver, which could move, and it's just placed into the chassis. But what we're going to do now we've got this with the hydraulic jack just touching where this big boss lower part was just touching the chassis leg internal section. We're going to now tack that in position so we know that it's safe, and all four mounting points. We effectively made a little jig, but haven't had to make anything because we've just got a donor one which was purchased to allow us to mock this up. Tack that into position and then undo the bolt, take the subframe out, have a look from inside, and if it looks like it's in the exact right area in between those two stabilizing pieces, then we can also then start the welding process inside. And before we do, and that'll still be tack welding inside just to make sure this doesn't move, and then we'll put the axle back into position and make sure that it's 100% bolted correctly before we start any proper welding any welding work of the internal threaded receiver. That's then just the threaded receiver. We still need to put the rear axle carrier panel back in, stake that on the left rear section as well. And here it is from the inside. So it's landed in exactly the perfect central location. You look at the vertical upright section of this new threaded receiver that we've created. That's an M12 by 1.5. It's fully threaded. The bolt won't actually go up all that far, but it's far more thread than the original one had, and we've got it perfectly in line with the cutouts that we had to create to remove the old piece, which is now in the bin. This is a brand new threaded receiver, still welded to the platform, so we can get that lined up and re-weld it. So now the threaded receiver is fully welded in its correct position with the subframe attached, so we know it was in the absolute ideal position, the only place it could go in. Then once that threaded receiver was welded in, then we've reinstated the corner piece of this rear axle carrier panel. So that was with plug welding through the holes that we created, and also a few extra stitched or tacks around the outside perimeter that we've smoothed down since, but that's all back in its original location. There's a couple of extra stitches here. You see the spring perch lines up in that location there, and that just makes it a little bit stronger. Seeing as we have opened it up, there's no harm in making it a little bit stronger. Obviously all these seam joints will be seam sealed over. The BMW seam sealer system is quite thick. It's about 1 inch wide over it's quite messy actually. None of them line up and they're quite floppy on one side and overlapping, but they are thick enough to cover the seamed edges of these panels where they touch. So we'll be making sure that our seam sealer is all the way in through the insides and gaps of this panel where we've unveiled it from the original seam sealer process. And first up, we'll be doing etch primer. So we'll degrease this shortly, and then we'll be applying etch primer to the bare metal areas, and then once that's dry, then it'll be high build primer, and then it'll be sprayable seam sealer, and then a top coat colouring, something similar to this sort of electrophoretic colour. We've got this sort of system colours from other E92s we've done, which is like a grey, green, olive sort of colour, and we use that quite a lot on the E46s because it's a similar thing. So that is the section reinstated, and next up we'll have a look in the boot. Here's the view from inside the boot, and obviously we've had all the modules thoroughly protected with welding blankets. We've got 3 big weld and fireproof blankets we've had all over the modules and the wiring looms whilst we've been doing this work. But this is the section reinstated. Remember we had a cut line down here across there through that little V channel and across there again. And this was the area where there were 2 holes drilled. That's now been welded to the top of the new threaded receiver, so that's now stabilized in its original position to this chassis leg. There's a little channel here which is very hard to get anything inside of. Might have to use a Dremel just to get that little bit, last bit of weld line down. But apart from that, the chassis leg's looking great, back in its original position. More importantly, using the original metal piece. So everything we've cut out, apart from the affected threaded receiver, we've reused, so it all looks original. And again, now we can degrease, vacuum up in here, and then it will be etch primer, high build primer, and then I don't think we'll be seam sealer in here because there wasn't any original seam sealer over these panel lap joints, so it would be dusting of e-coat with trying to dust in some sort of replica overspray of the BMW system, which this car is black. So we'll get the colour code and try and use some black very sparingly as an overspray to try and make it look original. For example, this is standard e-coat when the car is dipped, and this area here has received some sort of overspray when the outside of the car was painted at the factory. We'll try and give it a little bit of a replication, looking over on the right hand side, seeing what we can offer up to the left hand side. Here's the new genuine BMW brake pipes that we need for this 330 rear axle. These were 2 brake pipes that were so badly swollen with corrosion. Not very obvious because BMW supply them with a plastic coating over them, but the corrosion goes down inside the internal diameter of that that union, and then sort of corrodes and works its way on the metal pipe, but underneath this black coating, so it just swells the coating, and that coating then grabs tight onto this union, so when you try and undo it, it doesn't spin like that, and it just simply twists the pipe and the pipe splits. So 2 new brake pipes. They're not much money from BMW, and luckily they come pre-folded or bent to the correct shape, so we'll put 2 of those new ones on along with some spring clips, and that will sort the brake pipes situation out. So the etch primer has been applied on the bare metal, and also the high build primer, which is this black one now. So we're getting ready to apply the sprayable seam sealer next. That's why we've got the car masked up completely, not only on the top but also masked the underside sections that we don't need to or don't want any paint or sealers to go onto. And now we've got the area prepared, degreased and ready for the next stage, which is sprayable seam sealer. Now we've allowed the sprayable seam sealer to dry, we've also done a top coat colouring, which is our version of e-coat. So that's Redish Motorsport e-coat colouring that we've had made up years ago for the E46s. It also matches the E90 chassis range, and this being an E92, it's perfect for this car as well. So we've done you can see we've done a brushable seam sealer over the edges where BMW have done their brushing, which is round the sides and back as well. And also then a sprayable textured sealer over it. So it's quite a thin finish, but it's also textured still. So it matches the BMW sort of sprayable seam sealer really. You can just about see, if you worked out, that line there is our weld line. Quite happy to show where we've done it, because obviously you've been watching the video anyway, so you can see, work out where it is. But once the axle is on, and if you're looking at the car when it's built up centrally, when the axle's on, I don't think really you're going to know that this has all been apart. Obviously it will stand out at the early stages because it's all clean and fresh, but once some dirt gets on there, it's probably going to blend in quite nicely, especially because it's the same colour. It's not a black paint like a lot of places would probably just do black paint underneath. That seems to be quite common. Obviously then it stands out because somebody's got black paint underneath the car. Why is that? Whereas we've gone to good lengths to put original processes in place to make it look like it's an original sort of repair, I suppose you'd say. And then up on the side section you can see a brushable seam sealer section that we've done there, and also brush mark down that side first. We did the brushable first and then did a textured finish after it, especially leading into the wheel arch with a gentle blend out, so it's not got any up in that top side. It just sort of feathers out generally towards that area there, for instance, where there's none over there and none in the corner. It just gently goes out. So yeah, that has come out really nice. Pleased with that, looking great. So we're going to unmask the car and then we'll be able to cavity wax. That's the really important stage, and this is the stage where a lot of people and places forget about, and the repair will fail or get corroded quite badly within just a few years. But if this area is extremely well cavity waxed, so through this hole and these 2 holes here, we can ensure that the inside area is not going to be bare metal, it's not going to be suffering with any sort of swarf, even though it all gets blown out and it's all got weld through primer on it. It's absolutely much more sensible to put a lot of cavity wax through the area and then put the grommets in, and whilst we're there we might as well do the other areas that are surrounding it, and especially from inside the boot as well, where we've done that chassis leg, which is in this section here. We've got great access, which we'll be going through various grommet holes to fill that area with cavity wax. And if you've watched our other videos, like on the E46s and the other E92 we've restored, you'll see the cavity wax ones that we've got are sort of 500mm long, ½ meter. So we can put it through there and we can be reaching the dead end point of there. Whilst we're retracting, it's got a 360 fan head. So as we're sending in the cavity wax, if you do it in a clear tool, you're seeing the cavity wax all the way around 360 circumference. So we're not just getting the low-lying sections of these panels, we're actually coating all the inside, the vertical faces, the top horizontal, and then the other vertical face up there as well. So fantastic systems, and that will massively protect the car. We've seen cars that have had sill section repairs done at great body shops, say 4 or 5 years ago, that have fantastically well done, but because there's no cavity wax being installed inside, already they're corroding when you put a camera inside, and also the edges are starting to corrode where there's just moisture and bare metal areas inside that aren't protected. So it's absolutely essential cavity wax goes in, and that's what we'll be doing next. Here's the cavity wax process. So like I say, using ½ meter wands, which is now being retracted, which would have started well into the cavity section, we're able to get really deep and get that 360 fan spray so we get all the areas of the internal cavity section of this rear axle carrier panel. So we'll be trying to aim well down here, well past our weld line, in case any sort of any debris has gone down in that way, even though we've blown it out with an airline going that way. And we'll also use these holes, and then we'll go into the boot as well, go through the boot holes and go down as well. So the work on this 330 is now finished. We've got everything built back up, so the rear axle's in place. So is the prop shaft, the heat shields, the exhaust system, and also the new BMW brake pipes at the rear. Genuine BMW ones had to be installed as per the video because they were just very poor in condition and broke upon removal. We've got the new extended longer rear subframe bolt going through the subframe bush, and a brand new genuine BMW washer system, because that was missing when the car came in, because effectively the subframe had dropped very slightly. So it all went perfectly well, and you can see our sprayable seam sealer finish up here, which is completely dry to the touch, nothing comes off, and it just gently fades and blends out towards the original sort of the dirt areas and the little bits of surface corrosion, and it's blended behind the rear wheel arch liner up there. So once the car has been on the road for a good few months, that sort of dirt and road grime that will cover the underside of the vehicle will just make that a little bit less obvious that some work's happened in that location there. So grommets are back in, and it's obviously been extensively cavity waxed, as you saw on the previous video. Worked out perfectly well, really original repair and finish. You can't see any cut or weld or join lines underneath the car nor inside the boot. And now we've got also the extended subframe bolt has got 3 times more thread engagement, because the threaded receiver we made, it was effectively it was the same height, but BMW's thread only goes through about 20mm, whereas we made about a 62mm thread engagement. So we've got far greater strength in that location there. So that's never going to happen again. That car is completely fixed, and now it's time to get it off the lift so we can go out and road test the vehicle. And if anybody's interested, on the labour times, lots of people ask about cost and things like that. This was a 32-hour labour job, 32, so it was a full 4 days in the workshop. And then finally, looking into the boot, I've already taken out the boot carpet, and this tray was already missing when the car came in, but underneath this sort of chassis leg left-hand side boot cover area is where the repair happened. All this had to come out, as you can imagine. And that's the look at the left rear chassis leg, which looks, in our opinion, very original and unique. The threaded receiver is in that divot section just there. That was the area there were two drill holes that had been created previously by somebody else. Now that's also another welded connection to hold our new threaded receiver top and stabilise that even better. And the chassis leg has been blended with standard colouring in the car, a little bit of dusting of a grey sort of charcoal black, like the rest of the car has on that side, just to make it look original. And then that section of the chassis leg was cavity waxed as well, because obviously there were bare metal areas in there through that grommet location there, and that's all fully protected now, so that car is complete. And that's the repair complete on this E92 330 with the broken rear axle carrier panel threaded section, threaded receiver for the left rear subframe mount. If you've got a car, similar situation, got a problem with an internal threaded section, let us know, give us a call, we can talk through options, give you some idea of pricing, and as you've been watching in this video, we can carry out an original repair without having to replace the entire rear axle carrier panel. We can do a cut open section and remake that threaded receiver, and then weld the section back up and protect it with our standard procedure, which is very extensive: edge primers, high build primers, sprayable seam sealers, top coat colouring. So the car's had some road testing, done about a 12-mile road test on our standard route, which goes through varying roads, put the car through various load, making sure that the torsional load when we apply the throttle in a sort of a stamped manner won't make any torsional effect to that, or stress on that bolt section. We know the subframes twist very slightly, especially on the left rear, from all our research with the E46, and this is, although it's like bigger, it's a similar system, 4-mount rear subframe. We're just checking that there's no problems, and there's absolutely nothing. We've gone to recheck, re-torque the bolt, and it won't move. It's in exactly the same torque that we set it at. So we're happy this car is complete, and now we're going to hand over to the customer.